office hours community call, and we are going to focus on automation for Office 365 admins in a series that we now call Work Smart. And this is the first of many to come, I hope. So I appreciate you all joining me today. You guys are all still able to interrupt me, ask questions at any time, even though we're recording. These recordings are published in a playlist that you all can watch moving forward. They are publicly available, but only if somebody already knows the link. I do not put them out for search engine indexing. So any questions that you ask or comments that you have, feel free to bring yourself off mute. These are not highly distributed videos. This is so that those who weren't able to join us this week can watch it, or more importantly, so you can go back and watch this later. So the topic for today is around starting to drive automation inside of Office 365, and in particular through the whole Microsoft 365 suite. So what I wanted to do was figure out, where do we start with that? That's a new massive elephant, a thing that I've been preaching about for a while, saying that if you're an IT pro in today's world, you need to learn how to automate. Most importantly, what you really need to learn how to do is to integrate multiple components. Hey guys, make sure you're muted. Somebody just popped on and I'm getting a bit of an echo. There we go. And so you need to make sure you're able to integrate the various components, right? What Microsoft provides you is a platform, and it's really up to you to figure out how to make some amazing point-based solutions. So in this series, we're going to get into some of those, what I call point-based solutions, or specific education problems that we can solve. But today, to get us started, what I wanted to do was show you guys a demo that would basically take away any concerns or fears or questions about, can we do this? Can we do that? Is this possible? Is that possible? Those types of things. And so I decided, hey, let's go with what would be the one thing that would take away any of those questions. And that's if we could do something we've talked about before, which is use the Microsoft Graph. Now, when we talked about automation before, even some of you guys came on here and demoed how to use the graph through web services, how to use the Microsoft Graph through PowerShell. I've done some stuff with Flow in the past. I even did some stuff where I showed you guys how to use Azure Functions to run a PowerShell through a graphical PowerShell that then could reach out to the Microsoft Graph. But all that seems sort of complicated to me and a little bit complex. So I decided, you know what, there's actually a way to access the graph directly from inside of Flow. And if it's easy enough to access the graph from inside of Flow, I can do anything, right? Because as I've told you before, the majority of our automation components actually don't show up in PowerShell. They show up in the Graph API. So by being able to access the Graph API directly through Flow, the world is truly my oyster, both from a reporting standpoint, but also from an automation standpoint. So today we're going to start with just a really basic pulling a list of groups and updating a SharePoint site from it. But this is going to show you guys how to do that. And we're going to do this all from scratch without any training. No, wait. I do have training wheels. Matter of fact, I emailed all these notes to you guys while we were talking today. And so in the typical email I send out, you guys will have all of these notes literally copy and pasted right out of here, and I'm going to follow them. You should also note that I don't come up with a bunch of original stuff. This guy, Ashish Trivedi, actually did this exact same demo, probably far better than me, in a little bit different way. And I literally just took it from him. This is a MVP blog that's on Tech Community. That is really where this all originally started, about how can I use Flow with Azure Functions to use the graph. And so it's still worth reading, because ultimately we're going to build an Office 365 group request approval workflow. We're just going to leave out the Azure Functions part when we build it and do it all through Flow and the graph directly. Not today, though. That's where we'll go with this. So right now what I want to do is talk just a little bit about calling the Graph API itself. The first thing is, I just want you guys to understand a little bit about how we call the Graph API. It's done through HTTP, GET, POST, PATCH, all that. But we're going to focus on GET for today. And so essentially what we're going to do that, you put in the graph.microsoft.com URL, and then you add these other things like the version. And this is typically referred to as the endpoint, either a version 1 endpoint or the beta endpoint. So it's going to be graph.microsoft.com/v1.0 in today's demo. Then you put in what is the resource. So am I going to query or update information around the user, around groups, sites, drives, devices, that type of thing, right? What is it I'm interested in? As a matter of fact, /me is a completely relevant resource, which is a specific user, which is the currently logged in user, as you would expect. From there, you can put in a user ID if me is not the user you're after and reference them directly. You can even go into additional properties like what department they are part of, that type of stuff. And the question becomes then, how do I traverse that related resource? And I do that by continuing down that sort of path, right? Where I can do these query parameters and say, just show me the top 5. I can order them, sort them however I want, format them, do paging, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to spend a bunch of time on that today. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of how that HTML piece works. As a matter of fact, you're going to find out that's a very minuscule part of what we'll do today. How does the Graph API work? This is here. You guys have got it. I emailed it to you. Feel free to take a look at it. Essentially, what we're going to do is some of this stuff, set up a Graph API-based Azure application. We do have to do that. You're going to find out it's pretty easy to do, and it's not. You don't have to have an Azure subscription for anything. Unlike the Azure functions I showed you before, this all happens inside of your Office 365 subscriptions, which I really like. So understand the OAuth 2.0 URL, which is what we just went through, set up a simple flow, make it intelligent using the Graph API, and we'll talk some of the possibilities we go through. I included the documentation for how to register an application in Azure Active Directory. You may want to look at those. I'm going to do that rapid fire here today as we go through this. The first thing that we got to do is we've got like a 3 or 4 part demo here. So the first thing we need to do is create a SharePoint list. So we're going to come in here. We're going to go to SharePoint. We're going to pick some random SharePoint team site to work with. So I'll use information technology. This is not one of those fancy cooking shows where I'm just going to go to the one that's already done. I do have one in a different tenant, but we're going to literally try to do all of this in the next 20 minutes. Wish me luck. So when I talk really fast, just suck it up, Buttercup. Okay, I'm going to move the notes out of the way a little bit so I can refer to them. We're going to create a list here, and I'm going to call it group. We'll just call it flow graph group list. I'm calling my list that because I'm going to also call my application that. You guys want to do something far more friendly. I just want to be consistent with my naming for today's demo. I'll say create. I now have a new list that got created. In the notes that I sent over to you, I made a suggestion on some particular columns that you'll want to add in. It already comes with title. I'm going to create another one called created date time. I'm going to create one here called group ID. And I'll create one more. I have a few others that are in there if you choose to use them. But for purposes of this demo, these are the only ones I'm going to populate today. Renewed date time. Cool. So now I have that. That's my SharePoint list. In a little bit, what we're going to do is we're going to automatically populate this list with every single Office 365 group in our tenant. So what that means is any of the attributes to an Office 365 group could be included in this SharePoint list, right? And you can do a million different things with this, obviously, and you guys are all very creative, and you can put in the IM window different thoughts and ideas about how you might use this type of a list in SharePoint, right? So one of the last things we want to do, the notes that I have in there, is we want to record the SharePoint site address that we have here. And so this is, come up here and grab this whole thing and paste that in, figure out where it just took me to. Sorry, my notes moved when I did that. Site address, there we go. Okay, put that in place. Excellent. And let's see. So record the site address. I put that in the wrong place. That's why. Very good. Sorry, give me just a second here, guys. I misplaced where I put that in my notes, but I'm going to need that a little bit later on in our conversation. So I'll put that in place. And then we will jump to our next set in the notes where it says right here, determine required permissions, right? And then save the tenant ID, do some different things that we've got to do. So we'll jump into this document here first of all to look at the documentation. So we need to determine what are the permissions we're going to want. The permissions I have here are around teams. I could go up here to groups, for instance, and we'll go to group, and we'll go to list groups right here. So this is the Graph API documentation is where I'm at. It's just docs.microsoft.com/graph. So it's nothing real hard to find. And what we're going to find is right here are the permissions that I have to use. So at the very least, I have to have read all for both delegated work and school account as well as application. It does not support the Microsoft account. I could do read write all, but the least privilege is group read all. So I just needed to know what that was. And then we're going to go to our Azure portal. We're going to grab the tenant ID. We're going to create an app. We're going to go through all these steps that I emailed to you guys. So let's get started with that. So we'll come back over to our demo tenant here. We'll go to portal.azure.com. We'll go to Azure Active Directory over here on the left, and then we'll choose Enterprise Applications right here. Oops, actually, you know what? I want to go back one just for a moment. If I come down to Properties, Azure AD Properties and Directory ID. So right here under Properties, I'm going to need this Directory ID right here. So I'm going to go ahead and capture that and put it into my notes down here under Tenant ID, because that's going to be a requirement for me a little bit later on. Very good. Okay, I captured that. And now we'll go to the Enterprise Applications. And what we want to do here is Azure AD, app registration, not Enterprise Applications. Sorry, wrong thing. I want to go to app registration. See, I get it wrong too. And then I want to select here all applications, not just my apps, but all applications. And you'll see some things popped up here, right? So it's not just applications I own. I want to see everything that's in here. So I'll say new app registration. And now I'm going to give it a name. And if you remember earlier, I had a name picked out, which was Flow Graph Group List. That makes sense to me because that's kind of what we're doing. Whoops, I scrolled too far, sorry. We do want a API, web app API, right? And then sign on URL for us is going to be, this is kind of where do we want to come back to? We're going to put local host slash flow graph group list. This really isn't imperative for what we're doing or how we do that, but we'll put that in and that should solve our problem here. And once I tab out of that, I can then click create. I now have an application that's been created in Azure Active Directory. It really was that easy. I need to save a few things. First of all, I need this application ID that's right here. So in the things that I sent to you guys, there's actually a section for all of this to be put in. So there are demo guides and demo steps and demo notes. So you'll want to put in the demo notes, these types of things when you're working through it, because you need to save them. And then I also want that display name just so that I have it, flow graph group list. I'll just type it in. And that should take us there. So we're good there. And then now what I need to do is go to settings. I'm going to need one more primary thing, which is the application key itself. But first I want to set my required permissions. Remember earlier we went to the documentation over here and determined that the minimum permissions we needed were group, read all. I'm going to go ahead and go with read write because I'm going to reuse some of this in future demos. And I know what I'm looking for there. So when I click required permissions, I'm going to say add. I already have Windows Azure Active Directory delegated permissions, but I want to add additional permissions. So I'll select an API. In this case, we're using the Microsoft Graph API. So we'll select that. And this is where we're going to come in and find for us. And there is no good answer here other than just scrolling and finding what you're looking for. I've not found any rhyme or reason to this, but I haven't spent a ton of time. There is read groups. Here's read and write. That's under the application section. Now, if I scroll down further, here's the delegated permissions, which you said I also needed. And again, I'm doing read write. Realistically, If I were doing just the demo we're doing today in a production environment, I would do read only because I'm not writing to them, but my goal is ultimately to write to them. I'm just hoping to see it as I go by. There we go. Read and write all groups. I've got those two. I've selected them. So I've selected my permissions. I'll click Done. That adds the application permissions. I have one more thing I need to do as the administrator. One of the things I selected there was delegated permissions. I need to actually then, as an administrator, grant those permissions. So remember, the stuff that we're doing, even registering an application, going through all this, end users can do that as well. But there are some things that, so an end user can only access things they would have access to anyway, that they have rights to. And so sometimes if they're building an application, they're going to need an administrator to grant that. So I will grant those permissions. And then I need to generate my key under here, my application key, or app secret, if you will. So I give it a description. And again, I'm going to stick with my same flow graph group list. Oh, and it's a little bit too long, so we'll just put group there. And the duration, how long do I want this to last? I'm going to say 1 year. Depending on the application you're building, you may need it to expire never or in 2 years. For me, this is a demo tenant, so I definitely only want it to be 1 year. And it says there will be a value here when I save this. Now, the most important thing is you'll notice this where it says copy this value because you'll never be able to retrieve it from here again. This will not be shown again if you don't copy it right now. So I'm going to take that and put it into the spot I've already created for myself and for you in the demo notes section that I sent out to you. So we'll put that into there and save it for a little bit later. And that kind of brings us to the end of what we needed to do within the application portal itself within Azure Active Directory. So now what we've got to do is go create a flow. So we'll go to flow.microsoft.com, or we can actually just come over here and under all apps, we can click flow here and it'll take us right to it already logged in. So we'll do that. And what we want to do is we'll go to my flows. And in this case, I'm going to create a brand new flow that's blank. So we'll say new, create from blank. And you have to click create from blank again. I know people like mouse clicks. We're going to start out, we have to pick a trigger when we create a flow. So our trigger is going to be a button. So I'm going to manually click a button to kick this off. I could set this up to happen on a timer. I could set it up to be an event that occurs when somebody completes a form, an event when somebody updates some SharePoint list somewhere, when an email comes in with certain subject line, right? I have all kinds of triggers I could use. I'm choosing a button. And so if you think about it right here, I could add an input, which we're not going to do, but I could ask for maybe the input is the group name being requested as one of the things that we'll do in the future. But in our case, we're just going to trigger this really basic thing here. We're going to add a couple of things in here real quick. But the biggest thing we need to do is we need to take those 3 variables that I stored before, the tenant ID, the app ID, and the app secret, and store those as variables inside of Flow so that we can reference them. So I'm going to choose Initialize Variable, and I'm actually going to do this 3 times over, but I'll call this app ID. I'll set that as a string. And I'll grab my application ID that I copied out of Azure Active Directory earlier, save that, and then I'll go to my next step, which is to initialize another variable. So I have to do this 3 times. I have 3 different variables. App secret. This one is a string as well. I'll grab the app secret, which again I copied and pasted out of that Azure portal from earlier. Oops. And I'll say next step, variable, initialize variable, and this one we'll call it tenant ID. It's also a string. It's like watching paint dry, I know, but I'm working through it as fast as I can here for you guys. Okay, excellent. So we have those pieces in place. I'm just going to roll those up so that we don't have to look at them, but all I did was store those 3 values that I recorded from Azure Active Directory here into my flow. Now what I want to do is I want to add an HTTP action to it, and this is where we're going to actually authenticate to the Microsoft Graph and make a call. So I'll just grab HTTP here. We'll say HTTP. And we need a method. We're going to use the get method for today. And we need to enter a URI, which is the thing I kind of went through before with you guys at the very beginning. What we're going to do for this one is we're going to use this one here, which was just graph.microsoft.com. We're using the version 1 endpoint. We're going to query all of the groups and then order them by display name. So quite simply, we're saying, give me a list of all of the groups in my tenant and sort them in alphabetical order and ascending alphabetical order from A to Z, right? Pretty straightforward in how that works. But what we really need to do is make sure that we authenticate into this. So we need to do show advanced options, and we'll select authentication method here as OAuth, Active Directory OAuth. And our authority, we'll put in https://login.microsoft.com. Again, this is in the notes. The tenant, this is the tenant ID that I've stored as a variable before. My audience is the graph itself. And remember, these are all HTTPS. That is important. I'll tell you it doesn't work if you don't do that right. Microsoft.com. Client ID is the app ID, right, that I stored from before. Credential type is in fact secret, and we'll use the app secret there. So that all makes. Oops, somebody just came up. Somebody have a question?
Preston, this is Kevin. Unless my eyes are deceiving me, you've missed an I in the word login in the authority.
Thank you. That would have failed and been painful. I appreciate it. Thanks, sir. Typos, I love them. Okay, good deal. So that gets us what we need for that one part of it. Unfortunately for us, we also then need to do something with that. If I run this right now, which I can do, right? So we'll just save this, and real quick, I've got 7 minutes, I'm good. I'll say test, I'll perform the trigger myself. I'll say run the flow, hit run it. Just to show you guys, so far my application works. I registered an application, I effectively logged in, hit the Graph API, and it returned all of this for me. So what you can see is right here, my display name, 8th grade biology PLC, right? I have all these different ones, algebra and advanced teachers, right? So I've got all these different pieces and all the different groups that came into here. But that's in a format I can't really read, and I haven't done anything with it yet. This is quite literally just, I proved I could access the graph. So that's great. So the question becomes, what do we do next? And so what we really need to be able to do is parse that data that came back, and that data is called JSON. That's the format. It's kind of like, I don't know, looks a lot like an RSS feed or something to me when I look at it, but it's a JSON file format, right? Like HTML, anything else that we would look at. So when I come into here, I need, what I did is I had a link that I sent to you guys, which is, if you look at the URL, this is actually for groups. So I am again in the documentation for the Graph API under references, groups, and then under groups themselves. And when I scroll down here, I'm actually going to find that JSON representation, which you've seen that a bunch of times. You're like, what does that matter? This is all the stuff that you would find in a group in Azure Active Directory. So when you make this query, these are the things that can come back. These are the various settings or attributes of a group that could come back. We need to copy and paste that onto our clipboard, and we'll return back to our lovely demo here. And our next step is, for some reason, got deleted from my notes, but that's okay. We can do that. What we need to do here is add a JSON parser. So we're going to parse the JSON there. The content of that is going to be the body from HTTP. See how I selected under HTTP body? That brings the stuff that we found under the body of that HTTP call that we made a minute ago and pulls it in here. but it needs to know a schema. Now I could have taken the sample, like the data I ran before and dropped it into here, but using the official template is the cleanest way to do this. So I just take that stuff I just copied and pasted from the documentation, put it right here. Now it's got it all in there for me. It can now parse that JSON. So now what I need to do is for each one of those items, I need to do something. So I need a loop, right? And so for that, I can do an apply to each control. That's now going to say apply to each what? And trying to remember what I wanted here. So this is all the stuff pulled from that JSON. Man, something happened to all of my notes that got deleted out of here. Let me zoom out and see if I'm missing something.
It's weird. Almost like it grabbed the wrong one because it doesn't have display name.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for there too. So let's just see. Let me make sure in my documentation for a second here that display name is showing up. It is right there. I don't know why it's not showing up in here. That's kind of weird. Okay, let's do this. Notepad. Okay, we'll open us another notepad too. So what I'm going to do is go back to flow here real quick. In another tab. And I'm going to grab the output from a previous run.
Preston, can you do an each on a single string for the display name?
Say what?
You're trying to do a loop on a single display name.
Let me see.
What it looks like.
Right.
Now the loop is on the body, and the body is a list of groups.
But he was trying to select.
It should be something like for each item. Now apply to each. I don't think there's any other thing besides apply to each that.
I think you're right there. I think, but using the display name as your items is, I think, where it's.
Do you still have the schema in the clipboard? Can you check it?
Yeah. It's definitely right here.
Yeah, but that's not an array.
Right. So
Gotcha.
if we grab
inside.
Like group types is an array.
I'm missing something here. Let's okay, let's cheat. Here's the better solution. Let's go to the one that I built that works. See, cooking shows. And then I will put this all back in my notes and paste this into the team later. But if I go into here and edit this flow, we can see how we did it. Apply to each, and value is what I chose. I don't even see that in here. So I did do something a little bit different when I originally set this all up, which was to come in here. This is the one we ran successfully where the test succeeded. I can take the body of this, right, this output, copy it, and back over here, at least in the interim, although for some reason this failed. This is typically how people do it. Just use that to create the template for the JSON.
I think that had an outer array bounding around it, whereas the one you used didn't
Yes.
have the outer array.
Yep, I think that's right. Now, interestingly, at least before that failed, so if I have to replace that, I will. I had to use the official one, or the one I got from the documentation for this to work in the other one, so we'll see. But that did fix our problem. Now, the action we're going to take, thank you guys, appreciate you helping me troubleshoot my ignorance there. We're going to go to SharePoint, and we'll go to create item, which I think I must have missed. Create item. So we're going to create an item in a SharePoint list. So this is where I need that address that I had found before that I was telling you guys about. So it's under information technology, but where I have it, it is, for some reason it's a weird name. Your sites won't typically look like this one. We will almost always have a name. For some reason mine has the GUID in it, but it's probably because I was doing some funky stuff at one point. So I put that site address in, which is, by the way, just the first thing after the site. So it's always this, whatever the name of your tenant is, .sharepoint.com/sites/ and that next thing is actually the site address, not everything that comes after that, which is after that it'll come back and have like /list and then / the name of the list. We don't want that because I wanted just the site name, and then I'll grab the list name from here, right? So now that I have that list name, it pulled what were all the fields that we had there, and all I have to do now is tie that together with the fields that I'm pulling in here. So I'll put display name as the title, created date and time, and here I'll put in the group ID. So there's ID, and then I'll put renewed date and time. You could use any of these fields that you wanted, and I'll say, okay, that's good. I'll hit save, and now I should be able to execute this. And what it should do is take our original SharePoint list here, which is empty, and update that for us. Now, I'm a little concerned about that schema that we put in as the template for the JSON parsing, but we'll test it and find out. So we'll just run a test. I'm 3 minutes over. Goodness gracious. If I'd have had that one thing figured out, we'd have got this all done in the half hour, guys. Bear with me. We're almost there. Run the flow. Says it was successful. Nope, says it failed. So it failed right where I thought it would. I don't know why that failed specifically, but I do know how to fix it, which is the most important thing. When I come here down to this JSON, if I change this template, there's something in that data that's not working for me. I change that template. Now I can save it. Again, we'll just come over here, verify our list is still empty. Make sure everything is good. We'll run our test again. This time we'll click run flow. Successfully started. Now we'll say see the flow activity. This should take a little bit because it's got to run through. Now it's good. See how it says it's running? It's actually pulling all of that data, and more importantly, what's taking time is it's writing it into that SharePoint list for us. See this, boys and girls? Isn't that beautiful? Updated that with all that data for me, exactly the way I wanted it. This could be updating a Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file, a SQL database, whatever it is that you might want it to update. So that thing is still running, but we are definitely successful. So this was just an exercise to show everyone how relatively easy it is to register an application in Azure Active Directory and then be able to use that application to access the Microsoft Graph API directly. I didn't write any code. There's no PowerShell. There's no Azure subscription on the back end. None of that that's really feeding any of this. You can do this today with Office 365, Azure Active Directory, and Flow. So really, really cool. I like the way that it worked. So something worth kind of taking a look at, in my opinion, for you guys. We'll continue on the second Thursday of each month, making more videos like this to talk about what are some of the things that we can do with this technology in education. Probably the first thing that we're going to do is look at building an application that is an approval workflow for Office 365 or Teams creation. And it would be really cool if we get it to the point that there is a question. Do you want an Office 365 group or a team? And then it would automatically use the right Graph API calls depending on which one they selected. So those are all things that we can do. So we'll kind of go through some of that in the future. We'll have to build that over a couple of sessions most likely. And then we'll talk about other things to automate after that. Perhaps it could be the automation of the mass creation of teams based on a SharePoint list. So I have a list of data in SharePoint and I want to create teams and subsequent channels based on that data. There's some neat things. I'd like you guys to come up with other ideas of things that we could look at doing. And it may be that some of them are pre-baked things that I do and we just come on here and walk through the steps so that we can get to some more advanced things. So hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm going to stick around for questions on this or any other topic. So thank you guys very much.